The sound of his daughter's laughter echoed through the small apartment as Mark Jenkins opened his eyes, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar noise coming from his kitchen. It wasn't Emma's usual giggle, this was different, mature, melodic. Then it hit him like a freight train, someone else was in his home. And not just anyone, that voice belonged to Victoria Reeves, the formidable CEO of Horizon Technologies, the woman who signed his paychecks and struck fear into the hearts of executives across 3 continents. The same woman he'd been secretly in love with for the past 2 years. If you've ever found yourself in an impossible situation that changed your life forever, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that will leave you breathless, inspired, and believing in second chances. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs as he threw back the covers. He was wearing only boxers and a faded t-shirt with a hole near the collar. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he forgotten about an early morning meeting? Was he being fired? Why would Victoria Reeves, worth billions and featured on the cover of Fortune magazine just last month, be standing in his modest kitchen at 6:30 in the morning? The apartment was small, just a 2-bedroom rental in the less fashionable part of town. It wasn't much, but it was all he could afford since Claire had left 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. The child support checks had stopped coming 8 months after the divorce, around the same time Claire had moved to Europe with her new boyfriend. Mark had been doing his best, working as a mid-level project manager at Horizon while juggling Emma's school schedule, doctor appointments, and the crushing loneliness that came with being abandoned. He stumbled into the hallway, running a hand through his disheveled hair, and froze. There in his kitchen, wearing his favorite blue button-down shirt that had gone missing from the laundry room last week, stood Victoria Reeves. Her long chestnut hair was loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual tight bun, and she was making pancakes while his 7-year-old daughter sat at the counter, animatedly describing her science project. "Daddy!" Emma exclaimed when she spotted him. Miss Victoria made pancakes with blueberry faces. And she knows all about volcanoes for my project. Victoria turned, spatula in hand, her expression unreadable. Mark noticed the shirt was too big for her slender frame, the sleeves rolled up several times, the hem reaching mid-thigh over what appeared to be a pair of his sweatpants, also rolled up multiple times at the ankles. "Good morning, Mark," she said calmly, as if finding your CEO cooking breakfast in your clothes was the most normal thing in the world. "Emma let me in. I hope you don't mind." Mark stood speechless, his mind unable to process the scene before him. This had to be a dream, a bizarre, wonderful, terrifying dream. "I think we need to talk," Victoria continued, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "About last night." Last night? Mark's mind was blank. What had happened last night? He remembered working late on the Peterson proposal, then picking up Emma from his neighbor Mrs. Gonzalez who watched her after school. They'd had macaroni and cheese for dinner, he'd helped Emma with her homework, read her a story, and fallen asleep on the couch watching an old movie. He'd carried Emma to bed around 10, then stumbled to his own room, exhausted. There was nothing about last night that would explain Victoria Reeves wearing his clothes and making breakfast in his kitchen the next morning. I don't," he stammered, acutely aware of his morning stubble and bed head. Victoria's expression softened. "You really don't remember, do you?" She turned to Emma. "Sweetie, why don't you go get dressed for school while your dad and I talk?" Emma hopped down from her stool, grabbing one last pancake. "Okay. Don't forget you promised to help with my volcano this weekend, Miss Victoria." As Emma disappeared down the hallway, Mark found his voice. "Ms. Reeves, I'm so sorry, but I honestly have no idea what's happening right now." Victoria set down the spatula and leaned against the counter. "Mark, please call me Victoria. I think we're well past formalities at this point." She took a deep breath. "You really don't remember calling me last night?" Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He'd called the CEO? In what universe would he have the courage, or the stupidity, to do that? "Your phone called mine," she clarified, seeing his panic. It was in your pocket, I think. A pocket dial. You were talking to Emma about her science project, about how you wished you could afford to buy her the materials for a proper volcano demonstration. She paused, her eyes never leaving his. And then you told her that even though Mommy wasn't around anymore, she had the best daddy in the world who would figure it out. Mark felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Victoria Reeves had overheard his private conversation with his daughter, his financial struggles laid bare. I tried to hang up, she continued. But then I heard you tell Emma about the promotion you'd been passed over for last month. The one that went to Bradley Thompson. Mark winced. Bradley Thompson, with his Ivy League degree and country club connections, had gotten the senior manager position despite having half of Mark's experience and project success rate. You told Emma that sometimes life isn't fair, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. You said that even though you didn't get the promotion, you were still grateful for your job because it let you take care of her. Victoria's voice had grown softer. Do you know how rare that is, Mark? To face disappointment with gratitude instead of bitterness? Mark shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know anyone was listening. That's exactly why it matters, Victoria said. Character is who you are when you think no one is watching. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly looking less like the intimidating CEO and more like a vulnerable woman. After I heard that, I couldn't just hang up. I listened as you helped Emma with her homework, as you made up silly songs about multiplication tables, as you patiently explained why the sky is blue for what you said was the 100th time. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. Victoria Reeves, who struck terror into the hearts of board members and competitors alike, had eavesdropped on his mundane evening with his daughter. When you finally realized your phone was on and saw my name on the screen, you panicked, she continued. You apologized profusely and hung up. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. About you. About Emma. Mark vaguely remembered seeing Victoria's name on his screen and the wave of horror that had washed over him. He'd assumed the call had just connected, not that she'd been listening for who knows how long. So you came over, he asked, still struggling to connect the dots. Victoria looked down at her borrowed clothes. Not exactly. I called you back, but you didn't answer. I texted, but no response. I was worried I'd gotten you in trouble somehow, that you thought your job was in jeopardy because of the accidental call. She sighed. So I drove over. Your address is in the company records. Mark's eyes widened. You came here last night? She nodded. Around midnight. You were asleep on the couch, some old movie playing. I knocked, but you didn't hear me. Emma did, though. Mark groaned. Emma was a notoriously light sleeper and had no concept of stranger danger despite his repeated lessons. She let me in, told me her daddy was sleeping because he works so hard, and offered me juice. Victoria smiled at the memory. She's remarkable, Mark. Bright, kind, curious. She showed me her room, her books, her half-finished volcano project. She told me all about how you're the best daddy in the world, how you never miss her school events even though you have an important job, how you learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. Mark felt a lump forming in his throat. Emma was his world, the reason he got up every morning and pushed through the exhaustion and loneliness. It started raining, Victoria continued. Hard. Emma was worried about me driving back in the storm, so she insisted I stay. She gave me these clothes from your laundry room and showed me to the guest room. She gestured to his shirt. I hope that's okay. Mark ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything. So you spent the night? In my apartment? Without me knowing? Victoria winced. It sounds terrible when you put it that way. I was going to wake you, but Emma said you hadn't been sleeping well, that you needed rest. She's quite persuasive for a 7-year-old. Despite the surreal situation, Mark felt a smile tugging at his lips. She gets that from her mother. An awkward silence fell between them. Mark was acutely aware of how bizarre this all was, his boss in his kitchen, wearing his clothes, after spending the night in his home at the invitation of his daughter. "Mark," Victoria finally said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I owe you an apology. And an explanation." Mark braced himself. Here it came, she was going to apologize for the intrusion and explain that she needed to maintain professional boundaries. She'd leave, and on Monday, they'd pretend none of this had ever happened. "The promotion that went to Bradley Thompson should have been yours," she said instead. Mark blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. "I was overruled by the board," she continued. "Thompson's father plays golf with two of our major investors. I fought for you, but in the end, I lost that battle." Her eyes met his, filled with regret. "I should have told you. You deserved to know it wasn't about your performance or qualifications." Mark felt a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying lift from his shoulders. For weeks, he'd been questioning himself, wondering what he could have done differently, what skills he was lacking. "But that's not all," Victoria said, taking a step closer to him. "Listening to you with Emma last night, it made me realize something I've been denying for months." Mark's heart began to race again. "What's that?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I've been watching you, Mark. Not in a creepy way," she added quickly. "But I've noticed how you lead your team with compassion instead of fear. How you mentor the interns when no one else has time for them. How you stay late to help colleagues meet their deadlines, even when it means missing dinner with Emma." Mark hadn't realized Victoria had noticed him at all, let alone paid such close attention. "The company has a reputation for being cutthroat," she continued. "That was my father's legacy, success at any cost. When I took over after his death, I wanted to change that culture, but I didn't know how without losing our edge." Her eyes locked with his. "But you've shown me it's possible to be both kind and successful. To be ethical and still get results." Mark stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. "What I'm trying to say," Victoria said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "is that I need you, Mark. Not just as an employee, but as a partner." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "A partner?" Victoria nodded. "I'm creating a new position, Chief Operations Officer. Someone to help me reshape the company culture while maintaining our market position. Someone who understands that business isn't just about profit margins, but about the people behind those numbers." She took another step toward him. "I want it to be you." Mark felt dizzy. Chief Operations Officer? That was executive level, several rungs above even the promotion he'd been passed over for. It would mean a substantial salary increase, stock options, a seat at the leadership table. "But, why me?" he managed to ask. "There are dozens of more qualified candidates." Victoria shook her head. "Qualifications on paper don't tell the whole story. I need someone with integrity, compassion, and resilience. Someone who faces setbacks with grace. Someone who understands what really matters." Her voice softened. "Someone like you." Before Mark could respond, Emma came bounding back into the kitchen, now dressed in her school uniform, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Daddy, can Miss Victoria come to career day next week? Molly's bringing her dad who's a firefighter, but I told her my dad works for a lady who runs a whole company and she's even prettier than the princesses in my books." Mark felt his face flush as Victoria laughed, a genuine, melodic sound that transformed her usually serious face. "I'd be honored to come to career day, Emma," Victoria said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "But only if your dad says it's okay." Both females turned expectant eyes to Mark, who felt as though he'd stepped into an alternate reality. 24 hours ago, he'd been a struggling single dad, passed over for promotion, barely making ends meet. Now, his CEO was in his kitchen, offering him an executive position and volunteering to attend his daughter's career day. Of course it's okay," he stammered. Emma cheered and threw her arms around Victoria, who looked momentarily startled before returning the hug with surprising tenderness. "We should get going," Mark said, glancing at the clock. "Emma can't be late again this week." Victoria straightened up. "I have my driver waiting outside. We can drop Emma at school on the way to the office, if that helps." Mark hesitated. Getting a ride would save them the 30-minute bus journey, but it would also mean showing up at work alongside the CEO, raising questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Victoria seemed to read his thoughts. "Or I can have him take just you and Emma, and I'll go home to change first." "No," Emma protested. "Miss Victoria has to come with us so I can show my friends that she's real." Mark couldn't help but laugh at his daughter's logic. "I think what Emma means is that we'd be happy to ride with you." As they gathered their things and headed for the door, Victoria placed a hand on Mark's arm, stopping him. "I meant what I said, Mark. About the position. About needing you." Her eyes held his, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw something beyond professional admiration in their depths. "Think about it. We can discuss the details later." Mark nodded, unable to form words as the reality of the situation continued to sink in. As they stepped outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb, the driver jumping out to open the door for them. Emma climbed in excitedly, chattering about how her friends would never believe she arrived in a fancy car like in the movies. Before following her, Mark turned to Victoria, finding his voice at last. "Why did you really come here last night?" "The truth." Victoria's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing a vulnerability he'd never associated with the powerful CEO. "Because in 3 years of running Horizon, that accidental call was the first time I heard genuine happiness," she said softly. "And I wanted to know what that felt like." As they slid into the back seat beside an ecstatic Emma, Mark realized that his life had irrevocably changed, not just because of the career opportunity Victoria had offered, but because for the first time since Claire had left, he felt a flicker of hope for something more than just survival. Something that might even resemble happiness. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward a future neither could have imagined just 24 hours earlier. And as Emma chattered excitedly between them, Mark caught Victoria's eye over his daughter's head and saw his own cautious hope reflected back at him. What neither of them knew was that this morning was just the beginning of a journey that would transform not only their lives but the lives of everyone at Horizon Technologies. A journey that began with an accidental phone call and a single dad who woke up to find his CEO in his shirt. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind for Mark. The announcement of his promotion to the newly created COO position sent shockwaves through Horizon Technologies. The whispers in the hallways were inevitable. Accusations of favoritism, rumors of an affair, speculation about what he had done to earn such a meteoric rise. Victoria had anticipated the backlash and handled it with characteristic directness, calling an all-hands meeting to explain her decision. She presented Mark's project success metrics, client satisfaction scores, and team retention rates, all of which outperformed every other manager in the company. She outlined her vision for Horizon's future, one that balanced profitability with ethical practices and employee well-being, and explained why Mark was the perfect partner to help realize that vision. Most of the staff accepted the explanation, especially those who had worked directly with Mark and knew his capabilities. Others remained skeptical, including Bradley Thompson, who made no effort to hide his resentment. "Don't let them get to you," Victoria advised during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They had fallen into a routine of working in her office after hours, when the building was quiet and they could speak freely. "They'll come around when they see the results." Mark wasn't so sure. He felt the weight of proving himself worthy of the position, of justifying Victoria's faith in him. The pressure was immense, but so was his determination not to let her down. The job itself was challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated. As COO, Mark was responsible for overseeing all operational aspects of the company, from production to customer service to human resources. The learning curve was steep, and there were nights when he questioned Victoria's decision to promote him so dramatically. But there were victories too. His first major initiative, a flexible work program that allowed employees with children or elderly parents to adjust their hours without penalty, was met with overwhelming gratitude from the staff. Productivity actually increased, proving that compassionate policies could also be good business. Emma, meanwhile, had become Victoria's biggest fan. After Victoria's appearance at Career Day, where she had charmed not only the students but the teachers as well, Emma had taken to drawing pictures of Daddy and Miss Victoria at work, always depicting them with enormous smiles and surrounded by hearts. "She has quite the imagination," Mark had commented awkwardly when Emma presented one such drawing to Victoria. Victoria had simply smiled and thanked Emma, carefully tucking the picture into her designer briefcase. Later, Mark noticed it framed on her office desk. Their professional relationship had evolved into a true partnership. Victoria valued Mark's perspective and often implemented his suggestions, while Mark found himself in awe of her strategic vision and unwavering determination. They complemented each other perfectly, her boldness balanced by his caution, his empathy softening her sometimes harsh pragmatism. But beneath the professional camaraderie, something else was growing. Mark found himself looking forward to their evening strategy sessions not for the work they accomplished, but for the moments afterward when they would relax with a glass of wine and talk about everything and nothing. He learned about her childhood as the daughter of a demanding business tycoon, how she'd fought to prove herself in a male-dominated industry, how lonely it was at the top. In turn, he shared stories about Emma, about the challenges and joys of single parenthood, about his dreams for the future. He even told her about Claire's abandonment and the insecurities it had left him with. "She was a fool to leave you," Victoria had said one night, her voice soft but fierce. "Any woman would be lucky to have a man like you in her life." The moment had hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities, before Victoria had cleared her throat and returned to discussing quarterly projections. 3 months after that surreal morning in his kitchen, Mark found himself facing another crisis. Emma had come down with pneumonia, requiring hospitalization. Mark had been at her bedside for 2 days straight, trying to manage his COO responsibilities remotely while comforting his frightened daughter. On the 3rd day, as he was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair, he awoke to find Victoria entering the room, her arms full of stuffed animals, books, and a laptop. "I thought you might need these," she said, setting the gifts down. "The animals and books are for Emma. The laptop has the Henderson proposal loaded. I made the changes we discussed." Mark stared at her in disbelief. "You didn't have to come. I could have handled the proposal tomorrow." Victoria shook her head. "The Henderson deal isn't why I'm here, Mark." She moved to Emma's bedside, gently brushing the hair from the sleeping child's forehead. "How is she doing?" "Better," Mark said, his throat tight with emotion. "The fever broke this morning. The doctor says she can probably go home tomorrow." Victoria nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I've been so worried. When you called to say you wouldn't be in because Emma was sick." She stopped, seeming to catch herself. "Well, I know how important she is to you." Mark studied Victoria's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the slight dishevelment of her usually impeccable appearance. "Have you been sleeping?" Victoria gave a small laugh. "Not really. Turns out I've gotten used to having you around. The office feels empty without you." There it was again, that charged moment, the unspoken something hovering between them. "Victoria," Mark began, not sure what he was going to say but knowing he needed to say something. Before he could continue, Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Miss Victoria," she murmured sleepily. "Did you come to make me pancakes again?" Victoria laughed, moving closer to the bed. "Not today, sweetheart. But I brought you some friends." She placed a stuffed elephant and bear beside Emma, who immediately hugged them close. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice weak but happy. "Daddy said you've been taking care of the company while he takes care of me." Victoria glanced at Mark, her expression softening. Your daddy is very good at taking care of people. It's one of the things I admire most about him. Emma nodded solemnly. He's the best daddy in the world. But he gets sad sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping. She looked at Victoria with surprising intensity for a sick child. He's not sad when you're around, though. Mark felt his face flush. Emma, I think you need to rest. It's okay, Daddy, Emma interrupted. Miss Victoria should know that you smile different when you talk about her. It's your real smile, not your pretend one. The room fell silent, Mark mortified, Victoria stunned, and Emma looking pleased with herself despite her illness. Finally, Victoria spoke. I think your daddy has a special smile just for you, Emma. But I'm glad if I can make him happy too. Emma yawned, already drifting back to sleep. You should marry Daddy, she murmured. Then we could have pancakes every day. Mark wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Emma, that's not, Victoria and I are, we work together, he stammered. But Emma was already asleep again, clutching her new stuffed animals. An awkward silence filled the room. Mark couldn't bring himself to look at Victoria, certain she was horrified by Emma's suggestion and his obvious feelings. Mark, Victoria said finally, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. We should talk about this. Mark nodded miserably. I'm sorry about Emma. She doesn't understand professional boundaries. I'm not talking about professional boundaries, Victoria said, moving to stand directly in front of him. I'm talking about us. Mark's head snapped up. Us? Victoria took a deep breath. I didn't come to your apartment that night just because I was concerned about your job. And I didn't create the COO position just because I needed an operational partner. Mark's heart began to race. Then why? Because from the moment I heard you with Emma on that accidental call, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, Victoria admitted. About your kindness, your integrity, your dedication to your daughter. About the way you lead with compassion instead of fear. About how you make me want to be better, do better. Mark stood, closing the distance between them. Victoria. Let me finish, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've spent my entire life believing that success meant sacrifice, that I could have a thriving company or a fulfilling personal life, but not both. Then I met you, and you showed me it's possible to excel professionally while still prioritizing what truly matters. She reached out, tentatively touching his face. You showed me what I've been missing. Mark covered her hand with his own, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. And what's that? Connection, Victoria whispered. Family. Love. The word hung in the air between them, both terrifying and exhilarating. I know this complicates everything, Victoria continued. The company, our positions, the public perception. If you want to keep things strictly professional, I'll understand. I value our working relationship too much to risk. Mark didn't let her finish. With a courage he didn't know he possessed, he leaned forward and kissed her, softly at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself he hadn't realized was missing. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Mark rested his forehead against hers. I've been falling in love with you since that morning in my kitchen, he confessed. Maybe even before that. Victoria smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. So what do we do now? Mark glanced at Emma, sleeping peacefully with her new stuffed animals. We figure it out together, he said. Day by day. 6 months later, Mark stood in his kitchen, a new kitchen, in the house he and Victoria had bought together. Emma was setting the table, carefully placing the fancy napkins Victoria had taught her to fold into swans. From the living room came the sound of Victoria on a conference call, her voice confident as she outlined Horizon's latest sustainability initiative. So much had changed, yet some things remained the same. He and Victoria still worked long hours, still challenged each other professionally, still occasionally butted heads over business decisions. But now they came home together, to Emma and to the life they were building as a family. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been raised eyebrows and whispered comments when they announced their relationship. Bradley Thompson had even filed a complaint with the board, alleging preferential treatment. But Victoria had handled it all with characteristic grace and determination, making it clear that while their personal relationship was private, their professional decisions would always be transparent and in the best interest of the company. And the results spoke for themselves. Under their joint leadership, Horizon had implemented a series of employee-centered policies that had not only improved morale but increased productivity and innovation. The flexible work program Mark had pioneered had been featured in Business Insider as a model for the industry. Their emphasis on ethical practices had attracted new investors who shared their vision for responsible business growth. As Mark finished preparing dinner, his specialty, lasagna with homemade sauce, Victoria joined him in the kitchen, her call concluded. Henderson agreed to the revised terms, she announced, wrapping her arms around him from behind. The sustainability requirements stay in the contract. Mark turned in her embrace, kissing her lightly. I told you they would. No one can resist when you make the business case for doing the right thing. Victoria smiled, the private smile she reserved just for him and Emma. We make a good team. The best, Mark agreed. Emma looked up from her napkin folding. Are you guys being mushy again? You promised no mushiness until after dinner. They laughed, moving apart but keeping their hands linked. Sorry, sweetheart, Mark said. We'll save the mushiness for later. Emma rolled her eyes in the dramatic way only an 8-year-old could master. It's okay. I like when you're happy. She returned to her task, adding, but I still think you should get married already. Molly's dad married her stepmom after only 4 months, and you guys have been together for 6. Mark and Victoria exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Little did Emma know that Mark had already purchased a ring, or that Victoria had already spoken to her board about the potential PR implications of their marriage. All in good time, Emma, Victoria said, her eyes never leaving Mark's. Some things are worth waiting for. As they sat down to dinner, their little family complete in content, Mark reflected on how drastically his life had changed in less than a year. From a struggling single dad to a successful executive with the woman of his dreams by his side, all because of an accidental phone call and waking up to find his CEO in his shirt. Sometimes, he realized, the most extraordinary journeys begin in the most ordinary moments. And sometimes, what leaves you speechless isn't what someone says, but the life they help you build, one day at a time. As Victoria reached across the table to help Emma with her lasagna, her engagement ring catching the light from where it sat hidden in Mark's pocket, he knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected love and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that reminds us all that life's most beautiful moments often come when we least expect them. Sometimes the most ordinary day can become the first chapter of your greatest adventure.